you'll have a chance to read, continue reading up to Easter Sunday, but that's it. So today, well, we will go over last week. We'll talk about this week, a chance to just have some general discussion. If we finish it a little earlier, that's fine. We'll try not to go too late. It's a busy day for some of us.
What's happening with that?
I don't know. But I just want to thank all of you. Your conversations and your commitment has been amazing. And I know when I speak to some of you one-on-one how you appreciate your fellow group members for their comments and for their sharing. And I hope those who watch online are also able to glean some knowledge and some useful thoughts for your own study and reflections on compassion. So we're going to start off with our prayer, and then we'll have our quiet time, and then we'll get right into it. So the opening prayer this morning, everyone knows it, but if you turn to page, I'm trying to remember now. It's at the back of the booklet, towards the back of the booklet under the different prayers, and it's the one for St. Francis, Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. But I marked the page down and I have the wrong page number.
79.
79? Okay. I thought for this one, why don't we read that prayer, the opening prayer together? So, let's go. Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. Where there is hatred, let me show love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. Where there is sadness, joy. O divine Master, grant that I may not so much seek to be consoled as to console, not so much to be understood as to understand, not so much to be loved as to love. For it is in giving that we receive, it is in pardoning that we are pardoned, it is in dying that we awake to eternal life. Amen. Thank you. So now let's take a few minutes. Relax, sit however is the most comfortable. Close your eyes. Go to that favorite place if you choose to do that. Have some deep breaths in and hold, and then breathe out, releasing all the things you need to let go of. Okay. So last week we talked about well-being. And I was just wondering, as we just kind of review, again, we meet on Thursday, so there's still Friday and Saturday. Is there anything that came out from the other days that we weren't together, or something you'd like to talk about that we started to talk about last week, or anything else that came out of week 5?
I have a personal story, if you don't mind hearing it, that came up when you were talking about ego and compassion and love. And I thought of, when I was a little kid, I used to ride my bike to my grandmother's house on Saturdays and listen to stories of the old country. And she would also listen to things that I had written or look at artwork that I did. And she was the only one that paid attention to me, so it was really important. When I was an adult and my son was born, I put him in his coach and walked to my grandmother's house, pushing him, so our Saturday visits continued. And one of those visits, she asked me to paint her a painting for a bare spot on her wall, which I was only too happy to do. And since I'm not Rembrandt, I copied it from a book. I think it's the California coastline with waves hitting rocks and a cliff sunset. When it was dry, I bought a frame from the old Woolworth 5 and 10, if you remember Woolworth in its day. I took it to my grandmother's house, and then she said that she wanted to pay me for this painting, and I said, oh no, it's a gift. And she got stiff and straight and said, I commissioned the painting, I will pay for it. And you don't argue with my grandmother when she gets like that. It wasn't until afterward that I realized the whole asking me to paint a picture, she wanted to give me some money. She knew I was hurting for money, I wasn't working, I had a new baby, but I never mentioned that I needed money. She just intuited it. And she also knew that my ego/pride would not allow me to take a handout. So she devised this whole paint a picture thing so that she could give me money and that I could accept. And before I left Philadelphia for Arizona, I contacted an aunt that lived across the street from my grandmother's house who had nothing to do with the family and kept to herself, but I wanted to let her know I was leaving. And she invited me to go into my grandmother's house and take whatever I wanted. So I took a menorah from the china closet, and I took the painting that I painted off the wall, and it now hangs in my bedroom. And not because I painted it 45 plus years ago, but because it is a reminder of my grandmother's love and compassion to me all those years ago.
Thank you.
Very nice. That's a lovely
Thank you for
story.
sharing that.
Story, yeah.
Would anyone else like to share any story or insights, comments on anything from last week under well-being? What about encouraging others? Is there anything that you could think of that maybe you haven't done before? Is there any way that to encourage other people? Or how about encouraging yourself? If you had any more thoughts about that?
During the 10 years that I worked at a seminary, one of the reasons why the dean had hired me was she said she needed someone to act as a chaplain for the students. She said, of course, she could function that way, but if a student had a problem, the problem may have been with her, being that she was a dean and one of the professors, and students would not come forward to say, I have a bone to pick with you, since this person was in charge of whether they were going to continue in their pursuit of ministry. So she wanted a chaplain, and I found that was one of the, I want to use the word tender times in dealing with the students. I mean, we had a grand time together most of the time. But to have someone come and essentially pour out their heart to you in total confidentiality, that brought up that need, I felt, to encourage them in whatever way I could, and to give them the support and the communicate as much as I could my confidence in them as a minister, because they already were, whether they were ordained yet or not. And that was one of the joys of working there.
And of course, when you encourage, that ties in directly with compassion, especially when there's a specific need. And involved in that, whether you realize you're doing it or not, there's that other element of listening, the deep listening, the being present. And I can't speak for you, Reverend Judy, but I'm sure you were also not only listening, but you're probably observing. It's that body language part we talked about. All those elements come together and help us to really become in tune. And that's when we can have that true sense of perhaps empathy and care and compassion. So, anyone want to comment on that, or does it remind you of anything that you perhaps experienced, either side of that kind of situation? Yeah.
when I ran the Red Cross, that was part and parcel of the job description. Is to listen to staff or the ones paid, be aware of what the volunteers are thinking, encouraging the volunteers to do what they seem to love to do, and have staff working with them to keep it an encouraging situation. We have all these people who come in and are paid in the same as a church, and go off to other parts of the country to deal with people that have no houses, no food, no whatever. So yeah, it's part and parcel of what many positions require.
Thank you. Before we move on to this week, I do want to sort of touch a bit on, again from last week. First of all, caring for ourselves is an integral part of caring for others. You gotta be able to take care of yourself. That's the whole caregiver side too, to be able to care for someone else, right? Or to be aware of someone else's needs. You need to be in touch with your own inner needs. And then the ability to say no. There's so often we get caught up in situations where we feel we can't say no. But sometimes it's being compassionate to say no. Because if you destroy yourself by just doing more and more and more and more, then you can't help other people. You end up maybe in a situation where you need care. I want you to turn back, all the way back to page 9 in your booklet. And at the top corner there's this little mobile. The whole part about everything is interconnected. And there was the illustration about a spider web. We all know what spider webs look like. And the spider will know, like one little touch of something over here, that spider, wherever the spider is, it's felt. The whole web will reverberate in a way that the spider can sense. The mobile picture that has the living compass sort of main quadrants, heart, strength, mind, and soul, and then it breaks it down into the various parts. So healthy relationships, handling emotions, vocation, organization, stress resilience, care for the body, spirituality, rest and play, all those parts that if something is affected, if you think of it in terms of the mobile, if you sort of tap on one of those parts that are hanging, the whole thing will move, right? And the same with our body. So if something gets touched, if in a positive or a negative way, it's going to affect every part of us. So what I'd like you to do, it's perfect, we have 2 tables, so 2 groups. I'd like you to spend maybe about 10 minutes, and kind of almost like we're at the last week, so maybe even review a little bit of that. How does that speak to you, that illustration there on page 9? And can you relate to anything in there that you have been involved in, perhaps and identify which one of those parts have been touched, affected, good or bad, and how it affected you overall. So if something, spirituality, so if you have had something in terms of your own spiritual life and being touched, maybe through the study, maybe through something else through Lent, how has it affected all the other parts of you? Or emotions. Has something sort of hit you that has affected your emotions? Again, in a positive way or negative way? And how has it touched you in all these other sort of areas of your life? It could be current, or it could be past, long past, recent past. But take some time, and then we'll come together and talk about that. So how'd that go? I know there's some wonderful stories here, and I'm hoping there'll be at least one sharing from this table. But what came out of your table? Was there anything that related to your life being touched? One interesting thing Reverend Judy mentioned about the mobiles, she's talking about the Guggenheim Museum, where there's the mobiles, right? Display, and how they're never static. There's no such thing as a static mobile, because that's the whole point of them. They're meant to move with the air, right? They're meant to be moved. But the whole thing is in this specific illustration, if something gets touched, or something moves it, whether it's the wind of the Spirit, perhaps, it's going to affect everything else. But I'd like to hear, if anything, from this table before we go back to this table.
We talked a little bit about how if at our particular stage of life, perhaps, if rest and play is out of balance, it can really be a trigger for the rest of the mobile traits, if you will. And perhaps it also came up that maybe what we used to say yes to, and the many things we used to say yes to, sometimes that is now maybe wearing on us in different ways as we find ourselves in a different spot in life, and wanting to say yes, but maybe learning to say no, and accept that is kind of a good thing and a necessary way to approach life, and also knowing that sometimes there was some talk too about when there is care for the caregiver, that it opens up just new possibilities and relief, not both for the person who is receiving the care and the person trying to give the care. Anything else?
Anything else? Any other thoughts? Are you sharing, Gloria?
Just about.
Just okay. Julie, would you be able to share that wonderful story about the cleaning lady? No, seriously. Compassion. It was just a wonderful illustration of compassion, and not from someone you would have thought necessarily, although everyone is capable of compassion. But if you could share that story, it was wonderful.
Well, a few years back when Ken had his head injury, he was unconscious in Banner University Hospital, laying in the bed, and I was sitting in the chair staring at the space next to him. I was kind of out of it myself. And the cleaning woman came in the room to mop the floor, and she started to mop the floor, and then she looked at me, leaned her mop against the wall, and came over to me and said, "Would you like me to pray with you?" And I just nodded yes, and she took me by the hand and led me over to the window and held my two hands and prayed with me. And it was wonderful. It was amazing.
And John, you have a story too.
With the astronomy store? Okay. I enjoy astronomy, and there's an astronomy store in Tucson called Starizona. And I was in there one day before I was to have back surgery. I had a lot of pain, and I was going in to have it in a week or so. And I was talking to the owner, Dean, and told him that I wouldn't be able to handle my astronomy equipment because I'm having back surgery. And he put his hand on my shoulder and said, "Do you mind if I say a prayer for you?" This is right in the store. This is the owner of the store. The customers are in there. And he said a prayer for me. And it really gave me a sense of peace and reassurance, and that somebody who hardly knew me cared. And so, and my response is, I have a very high regard for him, and every time I go in there, I want to talk to Dean. So it's a reciprocal. But just right there in public. So to me, that's...
And the interesting thing about that person, so this is a store owner, it's a public space. We're we're talking about, he in a sense was making himself vulnerable in a way to criticism. You know, other people watching that could have thought, you know, well, what's this, like some Christian wacko guy or something? But who knows? But the other side is, not only he opened up, he allowed the moment to share a moment of compassion with you.
Exactly.
You allowed yourself to receive it.
Correct.
And if there were people watching, I don't know if there were people in the store at the time, how did it affect them? You know, so sometimes we can allow ourselves to be vulnerable, even if we might get criticism over it, but how many other people might be positively affected? The receiver, or someone watching, you know, we don't know. And the whole thing about that image again of the mobile, one little area here that gets touched, it does affect. So you now go on, you know, long after that situation, you have been changed by that. And I don't know, there might be some time that you might feel compelled to do that to someone else. Because you yourself received that, and you were also sharing a little bit about a story, if you wanted to share, if you could share just a tiny bit.
I was also very pleased to be able to tell him a month later that the back surgery was very successful.
So, hearing that, the two stories, what comes to your mind? Is there something that you have observed, perhaps, maybe not personally been part of, but have observed something like that? Or something similar that you were part of?
You know, every minute of every day, we have an opportunity to do acts of kindness, random acts of kindness. And it might involve a silent prayer as you pass somebody or whatever the case might be. But I also think that's a very spiritual kind of moment, and people have done that to me. Random acts of what I call the language of the day, random acts of kindness, and they happen all the time. And I've been the recipient, but I've also been the giver. And to me, it's a very spiritual thing, and it's an immediate, to me, an immediate connection that you have with that person, just like you and the gentleman in the store. It's everlasting, too.
Yeah.
And isn't this what we call agape?
John.
And so
Yeah, agape love.
Or agapao?
Agape, yeah.
And which comes down to love is a relationship.
Yeah. And today, of course, for this week, we're talking about compassion and love. It's all wound up together, isn't it?
One of the things that it has occurred to me before, obviously, but what we're talking about is that we have to be constantly aware of what's going on around us and get out of ourselves and be aware of what other people are thinking and feeling and needing that we're able to give.
With that, we're going to move into this week's topic, again, compassion and love. And on page 62, which was from Tuesday, the title of that day was A World Upended. A World Upended. And there's a quote there from the musical Hamilton. We won, we won. The world turned upside down. He goes on to talk about how, with Holy Week, for example, or even if you go back first to the American Revolution, everything was turned upside down. Yet it was victory, but nothing was the same again. We're now in Holy Week. And it says, the world must have felt like it was turning upside down for the followers of Jesus as they witnessed the events we now call Holy Week. Everything they knew and believed in seemed to be coming apart at the seams. Have you ever had that experience? Everything you knew, everything you thought, all the assurances seem to fall apart. Take 5 minutes maybe and just share amongst your group, just 5 minutes. Can you think of a time in your life where everything you thought, which was, everything was going well, everything was perfect, everything you believed in, and it just sort of went, okay, about 5 minutes. Okay.
To elation.
So, world upended. I know one of the first things that was mentioned at this table was 9/11.
Oh, yeah. Oh,
I mean, that is such a perfect example of just everything literally coming apart. And nothing has been the same since. All the securities, all the airport stuff, all the hassles is a direct result of 9/11 and the times beyond that. COVID. COVID is still affecting many. And some of you know, one of our well-known parishioners is home with COVID right now. So when everything is sort of turned upside down, and we talk about Holy Week and all the events of Holy Week and the cross, eventually to Easter, well, even Easter on the positive side, nothing's the same.
Mm-hmm.
All these events change your life. Even the birth of a baby changes your life. It's a good change, most of the time. But there are so many instances that life's going along like this, dum-da-dum-da-dum-da-dum, bang, something happens. Good or bad. And you have to compensate. And you may have to reach out for help. Or you may be called to be a helper. And in the illustrations here, from the writer from Tuesday, she talks about the acts of compassion of Jesus, on his walk to the cross, to Calvary, Via Dolorosa. Simon of Cyrene, who, although he was pulled into action, basically by the Romans, he had a compassion for Jesus. He carried the cross for Jesus. And Jesus, felt that in that moment. Or the woman who wiped Jesus' face. Regardless of even though people were to stay away, she still pushed through and she got there. And she, just deep love and compassion, just wiped his face. That's the very least she was able to do. Clean his face a little bit, a tender act of touch, give him a little moment of dignity from the spit and the dirt and everything and the blood that's coming down from the thorns. And COVID. I don't know if any of you had COVID. Well, I know some.
2 times.
Thankfully, good endings for that. But was there ever a time through COVID, or even right now, we're still coming through it? But in the worst of it, in the worst of the isolation and the fear, there weren't even vaccinations yet. There was a lot of fear, and people were alone for the most part. Can you recall a moment or share a moment of compassion, either that was directed towards you, or something maybe you did for someone, or something perhaps you heard of that was done for someone else during that time?
Okay.
Julie? And I'm sure you have, everyone has
As you know,
something to share.
Charlie died in the middle of it. At the beginning of, I don't know, the beginning of it, yeah, he died in October, it started in March. And of course, as caregivers, you had no contact. You had contact with him and the doctors who were already out straight. And it wasn't of COVID, it was something else completely different. When he died, my neighbor 3 doors down, who I know by hi, how are you, came over with a pot of chili that she must have been making for something else. Just appeared with it. Only away.
Any other similar stories done to you or you to others or someone else you heard of?
Well, you called me and asked me if I would like to be the junior warden or be put up for election. And that saved me. Because it was isolating. The COVID was very isolating and it saved me.
Thank you, Christy.
Christy.
Oh, the other
sorry.
Christy.
Right here.
Thank you.
Well, the first time I had COVID was, a year ago, last November, and I didn't realize how sick I was, and my daughter's boyfriend took me to the hospital, and I stayed there, but after being there for a full day, the doctor said, well, I think this is under control, we'll send you home with oxygen and medication, and I was just rather overwhelmed. And my daughter, of course, works and lives in Tucson. She couldn't come, and she didn't want me to be alone. And she tried some of these services to see if somebody, and nobody will come when you have COVID. So, and she didn't want me to be all by myself, and it was just a dilemma. And I didn't want to be by myself, because at that point I was doing hallucinating and things like that. It was awful. And then her boyfriend, good friend, and friend of mine too, said he would come, and he stayed all night. In fact, he stayed a couple of nights as long as he could and did everything he could. And that was a real act of kindness, compassion.
Very much, yes.
Because I was all alone. There was just nobody, And I, understandable, people don't want to come, because they don't want, I can understand that.
COVID, just the word COVID, still brings fear to people. People don't know how to act.
And just the fact that he sent oxygen home with me, I didn't know how to hook up all that oxygen and everything, but Chaz knew.
Yeah. Well,
Good. It was good.
any other?
It was good.
Yeah. I know in my last church, one of the first things we did, and I know it happened here too, when COVID started, we developed a phone calling system. Here we have the telecare. Similar idea at St. Paul's in Lindsay. We just had a whole bunch of people calling people. How are you doing? Do you need something? It really was. People were just totally isolated and fearful. And the very least we were able to do was call and talk. And in any time, any situation, that's the very least we can do. Just call somebody. Just call somebody and how are you? Is there something we can pick up for you? And then with COVID, again, there was this, especially in the early stages, make sure you have your mask on, stay away from their door, put this, the casserole over there and walk away, whatever it was, but you were still able to do something. But I knew of people, even with COVID happening, people needed to go to a doctor's appointment, not necessarily with COVID, but just they had to. And some people said that, I'm not going to let this stop me from helping so-and-so. So their mask, the other person's mask, all that kind of stuff happening. Sometimes they had the windows open a little bit to keep air circulation in the car. But there were still ways of maybe taking a risk, but through a compassionate moment. And of course, lots of prayer in that too. We're coming to the end, but I wanted you to spend maybe 10 minutes, and then we're going to be done. how has your understanding of compassion maybe changed or evolved, or new insights through the last 6 weeks, through this time of daily reading, maybe some prayer, reflection, meditation, whatever's been your practice, and our discussions? Has your understanding of compassion changed at all, been supported, been encouraged, whatever? So just maybe 10 minutes, and then we're just going to, couple last things, and then we'll finish with a prayer. So in your groups, just talk about that. Has it? Hasn't it? And if it has, how? Okay. So here we are. 6 weeks. Just wondering, where were you at 6 weeks ago when we started? Where were we at in your sort of your understanding of what compassion was? You know, right from the beginning, we learned that compassion, the two sort of root words that, you know, to suffer with, is really where compassion comes from. Where were you then? Where are you now? And where would you still like to be? So, just because something's ending, the work doesn't end. You know, even after a Sunday service, we'll say, you know, you've heard the word, now the work begins. So, we have finished some of the basic work, but where do you want to go now in yourself? And where, perhaps, would you like to see the church, St. Francis? Is there something that has come out of this that you have realized that we need to do something more, or to add on to something in terms of compassion, whether internal or out in the community? You know. So first of all, talk about yourself. So where have you come from, and where are you now? And if you'd like to share, it would be nice if everyone could share something, or even a word or two, because everyone is different now than they were 6 weeks ago, even if you haven't realized that. Okay? And the microphone's there to pass around.
I think all of us would agree that we're much more aware and thinking about it in so many new ways. I have loved hearing many of your stories. I mean, one that Julie told last time, it's still stuck in my mind.
I didn't tell it out loud.
Oh, okay. Well, anyway, it's just so opened me to try to be more compassionate and caring and listening. Listening is such a huge thing. Listening.
Thank you.
Obviously, since most of the time I wear a collar, I know the word compassionate from a professional standpoint. This class has brought it much more personal to me.
I think the talk that Pam and Larry, I believe his name, gave on stress busters,
Yeah.
I think that is an excellent idea, because being a caregiver a lot of the time myself, I'm beginning to try to take more time for myself.
That ties right into this, care for oneself. Learning to care for oneself helps you to care for others even more or
That
better.
program sounds wonderful.
Yeah. Christy, did you want to?
Well, I think I've learned to be a better listener, and I think it's deepened my compassion. I didn't realize how much listening had to do with compassion, but it really does. And I guess sometimes I get really disappointed if I'm talking to someone and they just don't want to hear what I'm saying, you know. So I'm trying to counteract that so that, try not to anyway. But yeah, this has been very helpful, you know. And I guess one thing about compassion is just, that I've learned too, new, but it's increased, is being there. Just being there for someone.
Being there.
Just
Being
be
present.
there. Sometimes when I've been so lonely, and will cry, and you know, especially that first summer, I just felt so, of COVID, I just felt so isolated from the world that, and somebody would pop in, or, you know, somehow, something, you know, would help things. But, yeah, because we didn't mention it here, but I think in this congregation with so many of us living alone and so forth, loneliness is a real problem. And I don't know about problem, but concern. And I guess I would like to see coming out of this something to do about loneliness and a sense of belonging when you're all alone. So.
Thank you, Christy.
Well, this very shortly, even though I haven't been able to attend the previous classes because of scheduling issues, and so I'm here today, but reading the book, I've learned how to express it more.
Thank you, John.
Explain how, anything we've given you
My
the
question
past couple days? Gloria?
What I am going away with is I can feel compassion
And so that kind
in an instant almost,
what I said
but
initially.
I many times don't act. I don't respond to someone's need, or I kind of pass that off because of fear, or because I'm not sure why. So what I'm going to go away with from here is that I need to extend myself more to respond to situations where someone is in need.
So response, it's back to the faith in action. That compassion, what differentiates it from just sympathy and empathy is the desire to make something better for that other person or group or whatever. It's the action part that turns it into compassion from simply empathy or sympathy.
I've learned about the compassion for oneself.
Compassion for oneself.
You know, start at home. Start loving yourself.
I'll piggyback on the notion of just that increased awareness of compassion, the opportunities to act, and then as well as the opportunities to receive it.
And I think what I said to the group was the whole process of a compassion, I would look at it as just a word, but it's not a word, it's a process. And the process is deep, and you have to be present, and you have to listen, and you have to really care with your whole heart. And going forth, I have some work to do. I need to carve out the time that I need to be more compassionate, because it's something that I do believe in and I enjoy doing, but there's a lot of things in my life that I'm going to have to curtail, and that's probably a good thing for my health.
Thank you, Jean. So compassion, thank you for saying, it's not just a word, it's actually a way of being.
Yeah.
It's a way of being. It's where faith and the action itself is integrated and becomes part of who you are. So when you think of Jesus, and I don't want to prolong everything, but we talked about these characteristics of Jesus last week. It's about a way of being. And it's something we work towards. You know, we may have moments where it all comes together, and there are other times where we maybe feel inadequate. We don't feel we're there yet, and we come down on ourselves. You know, oh, we can't be like him. We can't do all that. But it's a start when we acknowledge it and we want to work towards it. And compassion is one of those areas, as we have there, that we continue to grow into, perhaps. Anyway, thank you, everyone. And I pray you have a blessed next few days. And if you're busy preparing for any kind of dinners or friends or whatever, take moments to catch your breath through that and take your time. So let's finish with a prayer. The mystery will not be solved. The power of the mystery will not be denied. For the transcendent presence of the Holy surrounds us, will always surround us, and the greatness of the Spirit will endure forever. Be not afraid or anxious. The threshold on which you stand is the mystery of infinite love. And an intimate love, a love that beckons you into its peace, that welcomes you with a limitless compassion. Be not afraid or anxious. Close your eyes, open your heart, and you will know what I mean. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you.
Thank you, Father
Thank you,
Lord.
Father.